All right. So thanks everybody for taking the time on this holiday Monday night to be with us. I wanted to take a minute. Uh, First of all, do a couple of quick introductions. I'm Mike Rubin. You may not be seeing me; you may only be hearing me because you're looking at a screen that says Swickle Restructure. And Beth Wandice, our athletic director, is also here. We wanted to take an opportunity to share with our community a little bit of what's been going on in the backside, on the background of restructuring the Southern Worcester County League, which actually amounts to merging the Southern Worcester County League with a couple of other leagues. Excuse me. The purpose of this is not necessarily to take a ton of questions and answers. There will be an opportunity, I'm sure, for some of those. Um, so if you do have those questions, please type them into the chat, and we'll do our best to get back to you. This is really an information sharing. The timeline is pretty tight for what Miss Wandice and I have to get back to the other principals with, and hopefully you'll find that this is enlightening, and a lot of what we are trying to share is hopefully going to be seen as in the best interests of our students. We've been approaching this, Miss Wandice and I have been approaching this conversation through the lens of what's going to be best for Uxbridge, both in the short and the long term, while also trying to be clear that there are a lot of different variables that most people probably aren't aware of. Um, so to get going, things we're going to talk about today, we're going to give a little bit of an overview. We realize there are probably some folks from both the Whiten School or even Uxbridge High School that don't know who our current league members are and some of the variables that play into the current Southern Worcester County League. We're going to be talking a little bit about the timelines and some of the factors that have led to where we are today. We're going to share with all of you what we've identified as some of the benefits and challenges. And we're going to wrap this up by sharing what some of the next steps are. So there's sort of our roadmap for the evening. I think as a positive in giving a little bit of context, I'm in my 10th year at Uxbridge High School. That makes me the most experienced principal right now in the Southern Worcester County League in a current role. The only person among the principals who maybe has more experience within the league is the principal at Leicester, who was athletic director for a few years before moving into school administration, away from just athletic administration. And actually, Miss Wandice, who's in her third year, is also in the upper third of seniority of athletic directors in our league at this point. So, and we both have, I think, a lot of experience. I'm going in year 24 in interscholastic sports and year 20 of year 19 of administration. And Miss Wandice comes to us with, probably longer than that in the world of athletic administration. So we're able to bring, I think, a little bit of depth and experience to the dialogue that maybe some of our colleagues don't have. The current Swickle, and I'm going to highlight a couple of things. This is just listed alphabetically. The next slide is actually going to show you where the disparity in league size. These are our current league members. And Grafton elected and was, I'm sorry, let me go back a second. Grafton, this will be Grafton's last year in the Southern Worcester County League. They're joining the Midwatch A, which is the large schools of the Midwatch League, effective in the fall of 2025. That's a process they went through last year. Typically, our league bylaws involve a 2-year waiting period, which the principals voted to waive to allow our programs an opportunity to schedule for next year already, absent Grafton. Um, so you'll see that there is a range. There's a range in terms of competition, and I want to be clear that not every school in that list competes in the same number of sports. For example, not every school there has cross country. Not every school there has field hockey. Not every school has tennis. Not every school has competitive cheer. And a school like Uxbridge doesn't have volleyball at present. So there are some some disparities within that. The biggest challenge that we've noticed, and you look at the enrollment, the enrollments of our league, and I intentionally left Grafton off of this. Um, there's a lot of disparity. We're sitting, and this is only 9 through 12 enrollment. I know we have the eighth graders, but for the purpose of competition, the only variable that counts is that of which can count as 9 through 12. And you'll see that Auburn has more than 800 students. Tantascwa has nearly 1,200 students. And the rest of the league is actually all around the same size, in the 350 to 450 student range. The exception, maybe you could argue right now, is that Quabog, Prouty are both under about 370 to 350 students. And Southbridge, despite having roughly the same number of students as Uxbridge, does not have nearly the same number of students competing in athletics. And I'm not going to get into the variables that each of these schools have, but you'll see that, maybe if you went back 5 years ago, Northbridge had 75 or 80 students more than us, and now that number's shrunk considerably. A school like Leicester at one point had 475 students and now is down to about 375 students. The number they had for this calculation last year was 405, and they're down another 25 students this year. So you see that there is a disparity. With Grafton leaving, the bigs and the bigs in our conference were considered Auburn, Tantascwa, and Grafton are set up at a real competitive challenge, because a school like Tantascwa with 1,200 students competing against the Quabog with 350 is becoming pretty problematic, especially when we consider the statewide format. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And again, these enrollments are based on DESE's statistics from last school year. So where this leaves us is the merger encompasses the league you just saw, the Southern Worcester County League, the Inter-High, which are the schools in Worcester that sponsor athletics, the Colonial, which, with the exception of Parker Charter School, is all the vocational schools from this region of the state, the Dual Valley Conference, and more on the DVC and the Southern Worcester County League in a second, and then the three parochial schools: Notre Dame of Worcester, St. Bernard's, or St. Bernard's, I'm sorry, and St. Bernard is a dog, and St. Paul. St. Paul, for those of you who don't know, that used to be St. Peter, Marian, and Holy Name, and they've merged. And you look at that and you're like, well, there's a range of sizes there too. I mean, Blackstone Valley Tech, 1,200, 1,300 kids. A school like North High, much bigger than Uxbridge. A school like Blackstone Millville, very similar in terms of size. A school like Douglas, maybe 50 kids fewer than Uxbridge. And I did not go through, to be honest, with all of the different numbers. But these are the four leagues, with including the Southern Worcester County League and the three independent parochials, that are considering making up what would become the Central Massachusetts Athletic Conference, or the CMAC. And I know what everybody's already going through their head is, well, who would Uxbridge be paired with? Before you start going all the way down that road, give us a minute to kind of explain some things. I will say that in the dialogue around what the leagues would look like, there have been representatives from all of these leagues involved. And I will say that they have taken, for the most part, a pretty comprehensive and holistic view. They have not been looking at it through the benefit of what's good for one league or one school over another. So last year, a committee was established by the athletic directors. I want to be clear. I've been president of the Southern Worcester County League now for a couple of years. There were no principals represented on that committee. It was an ad hoc committee that was represented by about 6 or 7 ADs. They met in October. They established some goals. They collected data. They held some interviews with coaches, with athletic directors, with principals from around the league, different sports, different schools. I can tell you that there was not a ton of outreach necessarily to me or Ms. Wandice directly, as much as there was just conversation at the AD's meetings and the principals' meetings. They examined the 22 to 23 power rankings again before the end of last year. And the CEM is something called the competitive equity measure. I'll get into that in a little bit. They also reviewed bylaws from other leagues, including all the Western Mass leagues, the Bay State League, the Middlesex League, which recently went through an expansion, the Cape Ann League, which is up on the North Shore and also has schools that are very different in size. For example, we play Manchester Essex in a lot of state tournaments because they're the same size, but Gloucester and Beverly are in the Cape Ann League, and those are Gloucester especially is a really huge school. So there was some look at what those other leagues do, and the DCL, the Dual County League, also has a range from schools like Lincoln, Sudbury, and Cambridge, which are some of the biggest schools in the state, to a couple schools in that league that are just much smaller, like Arlington or Middlesex being the same thing. I grew up not far from the Middlesex League, and you got a school like Watertown, which has 650 to 700 kids, and then you have a school like say Melrose that has probably between 900 and 1100 kids. They reviewed this, they discussed, and they wanted to propose a comprehensive realignment that would not take place until next school year. This was presented to the principals in June or May of last year. They wanted us to, the athletic directors that had proposed it really wanted us to kind of move quickly. To be very candid, as the president of the Southern Worcester County League, there were some other things that came up in June for the principal of Uxbridge that really impacted my availability to focus on this as comprehensively as I would have, as well as call meetings with the principals. So it just didn't happen. I wanted to make sure that Ms. Wandice and I had as much of a time, focus, energy to look into this. And in June, we did not. You can speculate or guess as to what was on our minds in June or what our priorities were, but it unfortunately couldn't be this. Beth, am I missing anything in terms of the steps? I think you're shaking your head, so that's a good sign. Usually that's not a good sign when she's shaking her head at me. Some of the variables. The biggest one for the Southern Worcester County League is our enrollment ranges from Tantascwa to Quabog. And in a sport, for example, like soccer, Tantascwa is going to be a Division I or a Division II school. And in soccer, we're going to be Division IV. Quabog's going to be Division V. And our league bylaws has obligations for us to play each other. And that just isn't helpful for schools on either side. The goal of the merger or the reconfiguration was to bring in a broader group of schools that would make it more competitively balanced and give us a model that could be revisited every couple of years. And finally, to position us in the best way possible for the state power rankings. Again, I've been now involved in some of this now for the last few years since we've gotten involved in the state power rankings and they've gone to the statewide tournaments. And there are some places where the games are great and we take on our common challengers in the Southern Worcester County League and things work great. And then there are other times where it's not. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. To answer the question for those of you who are wondering about middle level sports, the long and short of it is it just doesn't matter for middle school sports. Middle school sports are not covered under any of the Southern Worcester County League, Dual Valley League, any of their rules and regulations whatsoever. Middle level really remains around who we can schedule where for what sports. We realize the dialogue that our communities had about the value of middle level sports. We are finding that more and more communities are dropping middle level sports as they struggle to have JV teams in a lot of sports. So this doesn't necessarily affect us at all because other than giving us a broader network of athletic directors with which to work in a more formal capacity. Right now, formally, we only work with the other 10 ADs of the Southern Worcester County League, soon to be 9 because Grafton's leaving. So we imagine that middle school sports will remain pretty consistent year over year just because there will not necessarily be an impact in terms of other than if more schools find that they have to go to middle level waivers for JV sports. And, we can't predict what other towns are going to do on that front. So this is what the league would look like. The towns that are highlighted in the yellow are the towns where these schools would live. Framingham is Keefe Tech. Marlboro is Assabet, and Fitchburg up there is either Monty Tech or St. Bernard's, and then Devon's is Parker Charter, which is in the middle, kind of squished between Air and Shirley. All the way to the left, you see Warren and Fiskdale. That is Warren is Quabog, Fiskdale is Tantasqua. Um, North Brookfield is not listed in any of this. They are currently an independent because, to be very honest, they have 140 kids, grades 6 through 12. So they only sponsor a couple of sports at this point and are going to continue to be an independent. Some of the other schools that are not included in this, and you see them surrounding us, places like Shrewsbury and Wachusett up in Holden, or um, Tohonto, which is in Berlin Boylston, or Ayer Shirley, Lunenburg, Oakmont, they're in the Midwatch. So they're not, again, involving us. So this is where the geography would be. And this is something I want to address maybe a little bit from an Uxbridge standpoint, in that when Miss Wandice is going out to schedule non-league games for sports other than maybe football, because the season is so small, we are relying on the communities that are around us, like Blackstone Millville, like Douglas, like Sutton, like Mendon Upton in some sports, like Hopedale in some sports. And we are finding, we play Bay Path, which is out in Charlton. We are finding that it is harder and harder for us to even want to play some of the Southern Worcester County League sports schools twice. For example, it's not going to behoove our field hockey team to play Oxford twice, even though they're in our conference. And this is going to alleviate some of that pressure. And I'll get there in a second. So the timeline, we have in November to notify of our intention to join a future league. Per the bylaws, it has to be a formal letter written, oddly to me, because I'm the president of the league, that would say, oh, we're intending to join a different league. We're all holding to that deadline. So the 10 remaining schools of the Southern Worcester County League are all going to hold to that deadline. In January, the build out of fall schedules typically that happens in December, January, anyways. And the goal would be to have that happen for 2025 using a new reconfiguration, which will allow us the spring to really drill into both our budget and travel needs, official needs, new league membership fees, and that sort of thing, and finalize the process of building out new league bylaws. I could tell you that building league bylaws is actually not a very challenging experience. I've done it now in 2 different leagues, and the processes of appeals and that sort of thing are really at the core of whatever would be in the bylaws, because everything else is really boilerplate. It says that you're a member of the MIAA, and here are the officers, and here are the rules for joining or deciding to leave a league. Here are the responsibilities of the principals and the athletic directors. It's very boilerplate. The league specific, sports specific bylaws will be decided by the ADs in charge of those respective sports, and they're pretty consistent. Usually, it involves the number of all-stars, the who the league commissioner for officials will be, and the number of home games home and away games you'll be obliged to schedule. The opportunities, it's going to change competitive balance, I believe, for the positive. I know Miss Wandice believes for the positive, and I know most of the ADs agree. It's going to balance the number of league games. If you looked at that, the Dual Valley League has 6 schools, and Whitinsville Christian doesn't compete in all of them. Douglas doesn't compete in all of them. And so their ADs sometimes struggle to find the number of games that they need. For example, if there are only 6 schools in the league playing soccer, that gives you 10 games, but then you have to go find 10 non-league games. If you're Uxbridge, we have 11 schools in our league. We're obliged to play 10 of them automatically. And then we go out and we have some of them that we're going to play twice because that's in our league rules. We'll play Millbury twice. We try to play Northbridge twice in just about everything. We played Bartlett twice. We played Prouty twice in a couple of games. We played Leicester twice. But that still gives us 16 games or 18 games with only a couple to find. And it's not necessarily equitable. And we actually find that for a couple of sports. It will align us for state qualification purposes by sport. And it does allow us to create more opportunities for collaboration within the league. And also, we are hoping that it will give us a better number of compete participation for sub varsity and middle level. Where are the challenges? Because I've talked a lot about what I think the positives are. The expanded geographic map is a challenge. And I've actually asked this of a few people. This is not as big of an issue for Uxbridge because we already are on the outskirts or the fringe of our current league. If you look at the map, Uxbridge is the furthest south and east of the Southern Worcester County League. In the proposed league, that would shift to Hopedale or Blackstone Millville. But the schools that we compete against now that are furthest away are still going to be the schools that are furthest away. That doesn't change all that much for us necessarily. What's the best way to align an entire district has been a challenge because you do have schools like Uxbridge, for example, that are really strong in some sports and maybe struggling in others and want to make sure that there's some equity within it. We do need to create bylaws and we do need to come up with official assigners, and we do have to come up with new rules for all-stars. Do I think those are impossible challenges? No, but in the spirit of transparency, those are real. I think the biggest one that probably gets in people's crawl a little bit is if you have a bigger group and you're not in the same division as a traditional rival, then what happens? And our most traditional rival, I think, in 10 years has always been Northbridge. And as you'll see in a slide or two, we're not going to stop playing Northbridge. So, that is not necessarily a concern. Some of the sports have unique rivalries within them, and we want to do our best to maintain them. And actually having this particular for a school like Uxbridge, that becomes a lot easier. So benefits for the schools, and I'm going to get into some of the weeds of how we're going to schedule, is competitive balance, unification, non-traditional sports. We right now are kind of on an island in the Southern Worcester County League with something like esports, and it's been hard for us to develop unified sports because we're one of only a couple schools that have it. And the closest in our league for unified sports are, Tantascwa, Leicester, and Oxford. So it's a little bit hard from a travel standpoint and just to get them on the schedule. And we also are adapting. The other leagues in Eastern and Central Massachusetts have helped have done the same thing in the interest of competitiveness. So for students, I mean, there are no more. The goal is that we'll be able to minimize non-competitive games. I was on a track team in high school that I remember my first meet of my life. We lost 83-3. We didn't win a meet until my junior year. It wasn't fun. It just wasn't fun. The league games are going to be balanced out competitively, and we're going to show you how. Again, broader range of resources, looking at leadership development for captains and other student activities. And depending on where we land in some sports, it does give us the ability to facilitate more fall schedules. And, Miss Wandice and I are constantly on the, sort of on the edge. And some of it is with us as well. When we get to August and we're looking at sign-up numbers and wondering, are we going to have a JV game? Are we going to have a JV team? And, especially in the era of fees, and a lot of our leagues a lot of our league partners do have athletic fees. You don't want to pay a fee and then find out halfway into the season that your number of games gets cut down to 8 because the other schools don't have teams. That's very much on our mind. So here are the three big considerations, and Ms. Wandice, if I forgot anything, jump in at any time. The biggest driver of our budget in athletics is not equipment, it's not coaching salaries, it's transportation. And in the spring, we combine programs on the bus. So, for example, baseball will travel with boys tennis, say when we have a game at Auburn. And if Auburn and Uxbridge are now no longer in the same quote unquote division, that may become harder to do. And we may be looking at adding some buses, some transportation, or the use of our own vehicles, especially when we just can't combine it for the schedule. That's already happened. I think some ADs have made a very big deal about this, but that happens. There are times where you get a drizzly day and baseball can play and tennis can't. And we're looking at, shuffling schedules already. But that is a very real reality, is the transportation line. Rivalries. Uxbridge is still, we've already had this conversation with Northbridge, both at the principal and AD's level, that we're going to keep scheduling them in all our sports and in the programs where we have budding and developing or long-standing rivalries, that we're not going to watch those go away. Just because we're looking at a different league. And scheduling may become different. This is a challenge for Ms. Wandice because you can't pick up the phone now and say, hey, I've got a Thursday. Can we do baseball and tennis or baseball and softball? Because they may be in different leagues based on, or they may be in different divisions of leagues based on competition. So we realize that that's going to be a change. And what does that look like? Well, here's the power rankings from last fall. And I'm not going to put up the entire spreadsheet, but based on last fall's schedule, I'm going to start on the left. So please stay with me here for a second, because I'm going to, use my little squiggly line here. That this is a 2023 rating. Whoops. And I want to be clear that the 2023 ratings are, that's exactly what they are. They're 2023. They are not, I keep clicking, sorry. They are not 2024. They're not current. So we did this based on last year. If we were to take all of the schools in boys soccer, Uxbridge falls sort of in the middle, with the negative 1.1943 power ranking. These are the 5 schools around us in those power rankings: Quabog, University Park, Oxford, Monty Tech, and Bartlett. We would be in what would be called the Central Mass Athletic Conference Division, I think it was 4, with these 5 other schools. And we would be obliged to schedule 10 games against these schools as our league. They would be our league games. And then Ms. Wandice would have to go out in consultation with Coach Chartier and find 10 games to schedule against others. You take 2 against Northbridge, maybe Blackstone, Millville, maybe a Millbury who we've historically played a game or 2 against, with the understanding that their ADs are going to be looking for games too, but they're not going to necessarily want. There's no added value to us playing a team that, for example, like Tantascwa, who may not want to play us and we might not want to play them if they were 15-2 and sitting at the top of the Division I league. Conversely, if we looked at a league like field hockey, keep in mind there's maybe fewer schools playing field hockey, we would have a power ranking of 3.3288, and our division would include Doherty, Sutton, Notre Dame, and Hopedale. We would have to schedule 8 games against them, home and away for each, and that would leave us 12 games to schedule elsewhere. Do we have to schedule Northbridge twice? No, not if the coaches and the ADs decide not to. There may be a school just on the outside of that, just underneath Hopedale, that appeals to move up, and then we would have 10 games in our league and 10 non-league games to schedule. but it gives us more flexibility. The challenge is that each of these power rankings change on a year-to-year basis. There are years where, for the schools that are power ranked, you have a really great year. For example, boys soccer, the year before, that number was a little bit higher. And so we're not going to be looking at things in just a 1 year window, but looking at an average of a 2 year look back. So next fall's schedule is going to be based on this fall and last fall's combined power ranking. So this doesn't necessarily mean these are going to be the leagues. I want to be clear on that. This is just an iteration of how it would look if we went just on last year's power rankings. So for the schools that are power ranked for Uxbridge, this is what our leagues would look like. And again, I want to be clear. Some could have 6 schools, others could have 5. It hasn't been decided yet because, quite frankly, we don't know who's in and who's not. But you look at girls basketball as an example. Uxbridge, Bay Path, BVT, St. Bernard's, and Leicester all had very similar won and loss records as us in the last couple of years. And 2 games against Southbridge and 2 games against there was another school that we played last year twice and won by 40 points in each of them. They're no longer an obligation. But you also see that in some places, the traditional rivals of the Southern Worcester County League aren't there. So, baseball, Uxbridge would want to play Millbury a couple of times. Uxbridge would want to play Northbridge a couple of times. Those games would stay. We would probably want to play a Nipmuc or a Hopedale or a BMR, a Douglas that are around us. And those games would stay. But it would be a coach by coach, program by program conversation. And again, I share this because the reality is this might not be. I just did this by 5 schools. There may be places where it's 6. I don't think there's any intention of having it be more than 6. Because 5 opponents times 2 games each is a nice round figure. Is that sort of what you've heard too, Beth? I think. Yes. Okay, good. And again, these are going to change. These are going to change. This is just based as a possibility of last year. And what that allows us to do is, if boys basketball still wants to host a holiday tournament, if girls basketball wants to host a holiday tournament, they can host, they can bring in whomever they would like. If there are non-league games that are against last year, for example, Millbury basketball, to beef up its power ranking, played games against Waltham and Newton because they felt like they had a team that they could do it. And they knew going into the Division 4 tournament, playing a bunch of schools that were in Division 5 and not winning games was going to hurt their power ranking. And I know there are a couple of our coaches on this as well that are seeing the challenge of that this year. For example, our boys soccer team's having an awesome season. I think 8 wins and 2 losses, but their power ranking is down around like the 20s or the 30s. And field hockey has a schedule where they're able to pull in a Walpole or an Andover, but they need that because otherwise they're playing teams like Oxford and Northbridge, Tantasqua, who they put a dozen goals on, and that doesn't necessarily help the competitive edge. Well, there's a whole bunch of other sports that aren't power ranked. Cross country, the tracks, and golf are not power ranked. And the plan, starting with cross country, is to look at multiple quad meets, invitationals, and district championship meets. And as somebody who used to coach indoor and outdoor track, trying to balance out to 2 to 4 meets, 2 to 3 meets in Boston, and a league championship, as opposed to having 8 to 10 to 12 individual races. It's actually not that different than what we're doing right now. There is also some conversation, at least at the outdoor level, about hosting a league freshman sophomore meet, which is something I brought up because I used to run one in my conference, and also looking at the number of available tracks and competitions in indoor track. The Dual Valley League, which the Dual Valley League, a couple of and the Inner High are the only schools that have have winter track, and they've used the Reggie Lewis Center, and they've gone into Boston to the New Balance Center as well. And the only two schools that have locally have indoor tracks are Tantascwa and Northridge. So we don't want to presume that we're going to be suddenly able to use the tracks around us more frequently. So we're just going to we're going to do our best to make sure that the competition and the geography matches the need, because there's also the challenge in a sport like cross country of over racing. I used to deal with that in winter track, and with cheer, which is not on the slide. If anybody in here is with cheer, cheer's done by regional alignment, and so we would just have a regional alignment within the league, just like it happens in the Southern Worcester County League. There would just be a couple of more schools in our region because we'd add in the Worcester schools and the Dual Valley League, and also the Colonial. Golf is I don't want to leave out golf. Golf is grouped geographically by course because a lot of us share, like for example, we share Blissful with Douglas. I believe Bartlett and Bay Path share a course. Millbury and I want to say Millbury and Sutton. No, Sutton uses Blackstone National, and Millbury uses a course in Millbury.
Auburn. Millbury goes to Auburn now.
Oh, Millbury and Auburn go together. So we have to work with our golf courses around availability. But it may very well mean that if we have those courses available, that we're, maybe having more than one team competing at much like you see at the Invitational. So it's not a huge change because some of the courses already have multiple teams using them in the fall. I will say that golf has become a little bit challenging as a little bit east of here. Some of the courses that have been used have been turned into real estate developments, and some golf courses don't want high school teams out there. So that is something we collectively have to negotiate. The MIAA tournament alignment. You saw I mentioned something a little while ago called the CEM. The MIAA tournament is different than whatever we play. We could play in a Division One in the Central Mass Athletic Conference and still be in Division 4. For example, we could be a D1 for baseball or softball because of our team's success, and we would still be playing in Division 4 when we get to the state level. They use enrollment figures, and right now the alignments have been used using the enrollment figures from last year, and then they adjust it based on two factors, and that's called the competitive equity modifier. One is something called the stability rate, which is how many kids come and go during a year. Some people refer to that as a dropout rate, but it's not just dropout. There's also mobility, kids that move in, move out. That was put in place less for places like Uxbridge and more for larger urban city schools that see maybe more transient populations. The high needs modifier is based on the state's percentage for high schools. If the high needs number is higher than 51% at your school, you end up getting a little bit of I hate to say a credit, but they reduce the number of students that they would judge your population for competition. Our high need population, while high, is not higher than 51%. So our alignments through 26-27, the baseline number of students for October 2023 was 450. We have a pretty stable high school, so there's no change there. Our high need student does not give us much of an average. Doesn't give us much of a multiplier because it's less than 51%. So the 450 is multiplied only by that stability rate, and that's our competitive equity number. So our divisions as of October 1 was cross country D3, football D7, field hockey D4, soccer D4, and golf D3. We found out about field hockey being waived up on Thursday or Friday of last week. So they'll be competing in D3 effective next fall for 2 years. The winter and spring alignments get released later this year. The reconfiguration of the Central Mass Athletic Conference does not impact our MIAA alignment really at all. It could impact our seedings because we would have a different level of competition within our league. Um, some misconceptions, just to share this around the leagues and state that you could just say you want to change your alignment based on your competitiveness. That's not true. I've been on the state softball committee for 6 or 7 years. Before that, I was on the lacrosse committee for 3 years. I was actually on lacrosse and softball at the same time. Simply walking in and saying we're not as competitive does not mean you move from Division 3 to Division 4. It just doesn't work that way. It also doesn't mean that if you move in one sport that all sports have to follow. I just mentioned that field hockey moved up from Division 4 to Division 3. Nobody else is obliged to do that. Same thing. If girls soccer said we want to move up to Division 3, boys soccer would not have to move up as well. There's also the misconception that alignments favor Eastern Mass. The only thing that maybe favors Eastern Mass is sometimes a little bit of the competitive measure because there are more big schools that are in the same leagues. With a new league, transportation budgets all will be higher or lower. We shouldn't say all ever. We should not make these gross generalizations. There are some sports that transportation will be more expensive. There'll be some sports where transportation will be less expensive. And the last statement I've already heard, well, if we're not in the Southern Worcester County League, we won't have any of our traditional rivalries. I don't think that's true. But I can tell you, I know that there have been times where Uxbridge and Grafton have had some great battles, and Grafton's leaving our league completely. And that just seems to be the nature of the beast sometimes. So next steps for us, we will have to notify the SWICL of our intention to join a new league. The SWICL has to vote on it, and everyone else's. I will tell you that one of the questions that has come up is, well, what if we didn't go to the new league, but everyone else did? It would leave us as an independent, because if the Southern Worcester County League loses at least 4 schools, and I believe that there are more than 4 other schools besides us, then the Southern Worcester County League would cease to exist. We're not going to have a league of 2. We're not going to be the Pac-2 with Oregon State and Washington State hanging on for dear life. We're certainly not getting a network deal, although Miss Wandice is working on it. The CMAC would then have to get official recognition from the MIAA and pass and finalize and pass a set of bylaws and any appeals processes. And by appeals processes, I mean schools that are finding themselves in a division based on an anomaly or not, that don't want to play up or down, being able to finalize that within the league. And then internally, we start work on the FY26 budget now. I've been here 10 years. I feel like we've always had a pretty good handle, at least at the high school level, to the budget and financially what our needs are. We are going to start working on that for our unique needs, Ms. Wandice and I, really in earnest in the next month or two, so that when we present a number as part of the school budget, usually in January or February, that it's something we can stand behind and we understand. Because the last thing we really want to do is not have a fair sense. Like I said, from a standpoint of financials, I think the biggest consideration we have is the same one that's on the table every year. Officials' costs are going up year after year. That's going to happen whether there's a Southern Worcester County League or not. The assigners' costs are going up year after year. Rentals and things like we need for facilities, the cost for music, for cheer, the amount that Northbridge and Tantascwa charge us for winter track because they have custodial costs and transportation are going up year over year. So all of those numbers, we've been looking at 2, 3, and 5 year patterns. 5 years, admittedly, a little bit off because of the 2020 and 2021 athletic seasons that were cut short, but we're or minimized because of COVID concerns. But even before that, I mean, we have our historical data going all the way back, because since I've been here, 16, 17, as far as the number of participating students and how many games and where they'd be going and what those costs would be, so that we can control what we can control, and estimate what we can estimate. So I'm going to stop the share and see if Miss Wandice has anything to add that I have forgotten. Plus, I need to take a breath.
No, I don't have anything to add. I think you covered most everything that is, pertinent. What I do like about this model is we can be a little more intentional in our scheduling. So if we know we have a strong team, we'll have a stronger schedule. The non-conference, I'm doing that anyway. I'm going out each year and trying to be intentional and trying to get programs to the best of my ability. I mean, everyone has to fill games too, so you don't always get who and what you want. But I try to be very intentional by that. But by going into this league, it makes the league that sport is in more intentional as well. So we don't have girls basketball beating Northbridge 50-5. It's not good for us. It's not good for South. I meant Southbridge. If I said Northbridge, I'm not sure which bridge I just said, but it's not good for us or Southbridge. So it helps the programs on both sides. Hopefully a Southbridge will be with more schools like them in girls basketball, and they can try to start to build something because the poor teams are not getting blown out by 50 on a daily basis. Cost-wise, as you said, fall and winter, I don't see much change with costs because they have their own buses. So girls soccer will have a bus, JV and varsity will go somewhere, boys soccer will be home, and then vice versa. It is the spring. And within that, we would utilize the Spartan 1 and 2s when we can, especially for the tennises with the smaller rosters. We're kind of lucky right now that baseball and softball are competitively pretty equal, I feel. So I could go out and still try to, schedule us both to play. We both play BVT. That's been competitive for those programs, to try to still keep doing that. But there will be some one-offs, and especially within the league. So as Dr. Rubin said, I'm really, the spring is the only up in the air for me right now, money-wise. But I do not think it would be, grossly significant amount of money. And then with the non-ranked, cheer would not change very much at all. They have regional rankings by their organization. So that wouldn't change too much at all. And then the cross country's indoor outdoor track, there'd be more opportunities, in my opinion, to get league meets on better tracks. Times in Northbridge or Tantascwa are not times that are going to be looked at really. Because of the way the tracks are, get us into Reggie Lewis, get into Boston a little more, and which comes with a price, obviously, because the buses out to there would be more, but we could share as well in those areas. But I think overall it's enticing. Grafton leaving, I think, kind of kicks the needle a little more for this league, and then other leagues having conversations too about changing their membership. So it seemed like this has been coming since I came on 3 years ago. This conversation's been happening and probably started, Dr. Rubin, to say, prior to me even getting hired at Uxbridge.
Yes, it's one thing I can absolutely say is the conversation around the Dual Valley League and the Southern Worcester County League merging goes back decades, two decades, in fact. And they've gotten pretty far down the road. And part of the challenge that has always sort of emerged has been, well, what about Whitensville Christian? And then, for a league like the Southern Worcester County League, there was never really a flavor among the bigs to add more small schools. It was great for Uxbridge. I mean, the Dual Valley League has made a lot of sense for Uxbridge for a long time, because we're similar in size to Nipmuc and BMR, and Hopedale's a little smaller, Douglas is a little smaller. But we were always all around the same size. Sutton, we were all sort of the same size. For a Tantascwa, as you saw with 1,200 kids, adding two more schools that had 350 kids, 450 kids, didn't really do much for them competitively. But adding Worcester South and Burncoat does. Adding Worcester North does change the calculus for a Tantascwa. 10 years ago, or I think now 11 years ago, Shepherd Hill left. They left for the mid-watch. I don't know how well it's gone for them. I don't know if they wish they had stayed, but part of their motivation was they were a school of 1,200 students in a league where they were competing against schools that were much smaller than us. And size is not the lone variable, as I tried to explain. Enrollment isn't everything. We've had a very good run of athletics in my 10 years in Uxbridge, and I want to position our student athletes, our coaches, and our community to reap the benefits as best we can. Not necessarily just to keep on doing it the same old, because I think there's some good out there for us even more good for us to accomplish.
And I am hoping with this realignment that it will help with our junior varsity programs. Anyone on, boys and girls soccer this fall has seen even JV field hockey playing some different opponents, because a lot of the schools in the SWICL do not have JV programs, especially on the girls side. So it's been very difficult to try to find another game, to find who needs another game in another league, who has, turf time available. And then how do we transport them when we only had the one bus budgeted, for us to go together, varsity and JV? Now, how do we get there? So I do try to get more home games, because I had officials budgeted, but I'm hoping that makes it a little less challenging as well. That if we're with I don't want to say like-minded, but the same type of programs, typically if you're doing decent, you will have a JV. And, in most sports. So I'm hoping that makes it a little better for our student athletes, that, they're getting the same opportunities.
Just check the chat. Doesn't seem like anybody's typed any questions in there. But if anyone does have any questions, they can type them in the chat, and I'll keep the chat open. I will be posting the recording of this and sending it out to, the masses. And the one thing that I think is maybe a little bit unclear that people may have questions about is really, how the different alignments get calculated over a couple of years and where those numbers come from. But as I've seen over the last couple of years, both from the Max Preps and the MIAA's different metrics, they've tended to be pretty accurate. I will say that's a credit to Ms. Wandice and her reporting. We've seen some schools around that have made some mistakes, and it's caused some kerfuffles, but we're not one of them. So I think we've done a pretty good job on that end, because I think our data is pretty clean from our perspective. If there aren't questions, or if people have questions, types of fields will come up with field hockey. Yes. Types of fields has actually already come up, because there are some schools that only play on grass, and there are some schools that play only on turf. There are also some schools that are willing to play on the road to know that they're going to get a game on turf as opposed to on grass. But we're certainly not going to be saying to people, well, you're not going to, the opt-out for I don't want to play there because their field is grass is just not necessarily going to be an option. I feel like we've got enough challenges. That becomes an issue as well in the spring, when rain becomes a factor. Again, we don't see lacrosse because Uxbridge doesn't have lacrosse, but that becomes an issue for programs in the spring that share tracks and fields with lacrosse, track and field, baseball, softball, and not necessarily this part of the state, but rugby is growing. So to answer the next question, there are a bunch of sports that are power ranked that we don't have. We have not talked about what it would look like to add them. We don't necessarily have a critical mass for sports like lacrosse to manage on our own. And so this does not necessarily factor into that, at least for us yet.
And I'm not sure I saw a hockey family name on here, but ice hockey does not fall into this new league. They stay where they are, I believe.
They do.
Yeah.
and the waiver process with the state for, combining co-ops and that, then none of that will change either. So for our students who play on a lacrosse through Nipmuc, um, they would stay. They would stay in that same arrangement, at least as long as the state approves it. All right. I don't see anything else. If anybody gets what I like to call the car ride question, it's the question when you leave a meeting and you're on your way home and you think to yourself, "I wish I'd asked that." I'm gonna pop. Well, most people have my email already, but just send me a message either on Parent Square or shoot me or Miss Wandice an email. We'll be happy to answer questions that we have answers to, and if there are questions we don't have answers to that are worth us pursuing, certainly to others who may have those answers, we'll do that. And we don't profess to be all knowing. There are going to be some variables that come up that we'll try our best to address as they do. And again, our goal is to do right by our Spartans, by our school and our community. And I think we're well on our way to doing that. So I appreciate everyone taking the time today on a Monday night to join us. Done in under an hour, which is always a good thing. And yeah, we'll send this recording out and get it to everybody for future reference. Thanks for being here and have a good night.